Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvabhuta Guhashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sarva Vide Namaha. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome also to the many students watching these classes online. And we continue today excuse me, with our study of chapter 13. It has that unusual name, Achakshustva Prakaranam, the chapter on the absence of eyesight. And it's a reference, in fact, in the last week's class, I shared with you the passage from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which says that Atma is ashrotram, earless, so to speak, and achakshushkam, eyeless, and it went on. Remember, all that negation went on in that Brihadaranyaka Upanishad passage. And this chapter is partially based on that, has a number of other topics as well. The topic for today, at least in the first 3, 4, 5 verses, is sakshi. We had a nice discussion about sakshi, actually following last week's class and the satsang. And maybe by way of introduction, let me share with you a perspective on sakshi, since there's confusion about what is the difference between consciousness and sakshi. And if I tell you, it won't help. If I tell you this, sakshi is consciousness, consciousness is not sakshi. Does that help? I don't think so. But that's really the case. More helpful to say that consciousness is the thing and sakshi is a relational term. And let me explain that language. You are a person. Fine. You might also be a brother or a sister. But notice the difference. To call you a brother or a sister is a relational expression. If you don't have a sibling, you're not a brother or a sister. So to call you a person is like referring to consciousness. It's the thing in itself. On the other hand, to call you a brother or a sister is like the term sakshi. Sakshi is consciousness with regard to something observed. Just like to call you brother or sister is to refer to you, the person, but with regard to your siblings. So we go back to my opening definition. We could definitely say brother is you, but you are not necessarily the brother, right? You are the sister is you, but you are not necessarily a sister, because if there's no siblings. You get the point? So sakshi is a relational term, and Shankara here explains it in such a vivid way, it'll make it very clear. And we continue with verse 6. Yatu syan manasi vrittish, yatu syan manasi vrittish, chakshukaruparanjana, chakshushkaruparanjana, nityamevatmano drishtya, nityamevatmano drishtya, nityaya drishyate hi sa, nityaya drishyate hi sa. Ya vrittihi, the activities of the mind, vritti. And we used that. That's a very helpful technical term because it includes all mental activities. In general, mental activities include thoughts, include perceptions, include emotions, may include other things. He refers to memory later. So vritti means all thoughts in all mental activities in general. He says, those vrittihis, syat, whatever vrittis are there, manasi, in the mind, whatever vrittis are there, activities are there of the mind, with regard to those mental activities, now we're going to narrow down to not all mental activities, but specifically vrittis which are chakshushka, born of perception. And this is such an important analysis in that, and we've discussed this many times here, you do not see me directly. We've had this discussion a number of times. You see me indirectly. And how indirect, it's amazing how many steps are in between me and your perception. Remember we said that in terms of your perception of me, there are 2 half-inch tall Swami Taratmanandas on the back of each of your retinas. Correct? So on the back of each retina is this upside down tiny image of me. And if you think that is an abstraction, then consider the fact that that little image is turned into electrical impulses which travel along your optic nerve to the back of your head, where the brain I'm using the term magically facetiously. I don't mean it's literally. So almost by magic, an image of me arises in your mind. To me, that's pretty close to magic, I think. And to be honest, neuroscience has been studying this for a long time. They're just barely scratching the surface of how that works. They have they understand some parts of it. And vision is so amazingly complex. You have different parts of your brain that are dedicated to observing motion. You have different parts of your brain that are dedicated to observing faces. These are actually physical parts of your brain which are so specialized. They pick up motion that your eyes detect. They pick up faces that your anyway, the point I'm making here is that Shankara didn't, without understanding any of this neuroscience, Shankara understood the remoteness of perception. And what he said is, in your mind arise vrittis, chakshusha vrittayaha, vrittis born of the power of eyesight, which are rupa ranjana. Vrittis which are, literally, ranjana means colored. They're colored by the form, which simply means the vrittis in your mind that arise express the form of what you see. So right now, the image of me in your mind expresses the rupa, the form of that which is looking at you. So Shankara understood the remoteness of vision very well. Now the real point here, though, is nityam eva atmanaha drishtya nityaya drishyate hisa. Let me connect the words for you. That form is nityam drishyate. You have to bounce around with these words here. It is always seen. The vritti is always seen. Notice we have two levels of seeing now. We have one level, your eyeballs are seeing me and creating a vritti in your mind. Now we have a second level of seeing. And this is where sakshi comes in, because the image in your mind is observed by you. You are the sakshi. The image in your mind is sakshya, which means witnessed, observed. And nityam drishyate, it is constantly observed, meaning that your consciousness doesn't turn on and off, as we've discussed before. It is constantly observed, nityam drishyate, by what? Drishtya, nityaya. By drishti is a word here for consciousness. It literally means seeing. Drishti means seeing. Drishtya is how it comes in the verse. And here it really means chit, consciousness. Nityaya drishtya, by unchanging consciousness, if I can paraphrase a little bit. And describing then sakshi, having a relationship with sakshya, what is observed, the image of me in your mind. And I find an interesting word here, atmanaha drishtya. It is observed by the drishti, the consciousness, which is atmanaha, which belongs to atma. So we could say the atma's consciousness, which is exactly, remember we've joked several times here about my expression, your consciousness. And we've said kind of again and again, it's really not your consciousness, because there is only one consciousness that reveals the activities in all minds. But using conventional language, it's common to use that term, your consciousness. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is I'm not the only person to make this linguistic compromise, we can call it that. What is Shankara saying here? Atmanaha drishti, the consciousness of Atma. There's no consciousness. If you want to be, what do they say, a stickler for details, there is no consciousness of Atma. Atma is consciousness. Remember that word of indicates a possession. In some commentaries, they'll use the expression, they'll use a metaphor. This may or may not work for you. When you say the sweetness of sugar, is that a reasonable expression, the sweetness of sugar? Now, so that means sweetness is possessed by sugar. And remember the logic we've used before? Anything you possess is something you could be without. You possess clothing. You would continue to exist just fine without clothing. Might be a little embarrassing right now, but your existence is independent of clothing. So you minus clothing is still you. Sugar minus sweetness, say what? You get the point. Sweetness is not possessed by sugar. Sugar is sweetness itself. In the same way, consciousness is not possessed by Atma. This is the expression, Atmanaha drishtihi, the consciousness of Atma. But just as sweetness is not an attribute of sugar, consciousness is not an attribute of Atma. Again, sugar minus sweetness has no meaning. Atma minus consciousness has no meaning. Sugar is sweetness, Atma is consciousness. Now it's interesting that Shankara himself uses this kind of genitive expression, and we've joked about how it's useful, but it has a limitation. I want to share with you. A commentator, by the way, whoever sent this comment, I think it was from our last class. I thought it was really insightful. I want to show you on the board. I need to push this button. Okay, so we were talking about that expression, your consciousness. I can only do this on the board. So, your consciousness. You said the solution to the problem is sometimes, maybe not in the last class, but in some class, I said it's not your consciousness, it's you consciousness. He did something more clever. I think this is quite clever. Your consciousness, this contraction, you are consciousness. Perfect. It's a play on words, but it really makes a nice point. So we loosely talk about your consciousness, but really speaking, it is you are consciousness. The second, your consciousness. I like that. Thank you to whoever sent that comment. Very clever. Okay, let us. Are we done with this verse? Yeah. Okay. So this verse talked about how visual perception takes place. In the next verse, now we stretch out to other senses, other things that you are the sakshi of. By the way, sakshi means a awareful witness. Let me just see if we're on board here. Are you the sakshi of me sitting in this chair? If you can answer no, good for you. You are the witness, the conscious observer of what's in your mind. You could say that your eyeballs have some contact with me because of the light that reflects off my body. So your eyeballs have some contact with me, not your consciousness. Your consciousness is the witness not of the physical body sitting on this chair. Your consciousness is the witness of the me that appears in your mind as an image, as a vritti. Okay, we'll continue. Tatanyendriya yuktaya, tatanyendriya yuktaya, vrittayo vishayanjanaha, vrittayo vishayanjanaha, smriti raghari rupacha, smriti raghari rupacha, kevalantar manasyapi, kevalantar manasyapi. So this verse extends what was taught in the prior verse. Not only are you the sakshi of images in your mind produced by your eyes, but tata, in the same way, anya indriya yukta yavrittayaha, yavrittayaha, those other vrittis, which are anya indriya yukta, which are yukta associated with anya, other, indriya, other senses. What are those senses? Hearing, taste, smell, and touch, our five senses. So vrittis, which are associated with your other four senses, in addition to sight, those vrittis being vishaya, anjanaha, being colored by the object, which means assuming the form of the object. This is a very typical language we use in Advaita Vedanta. Vrittis assume the form of the object, and it's a metaphor. You know, vritti is not a physical things you can think of as attaining form. You can say that clay takes the form of a pot, but vritti is nothing so tangible as clay. So think about this as a metaphor to help you understand. A vritti in the form of my image. A vritti that's assumed the form of the sound of my voice. By the way, here's another example of remoteness. All you hear is sounds. Blah, 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 blah. That's what your ears pick up. It's other parts of your brain that turn these sounds into meaningful words and sentences. You don't hear meaningful words and sentences, right? You hear sounds. I'm just another example of this remoteness. So, in your mind, there are vrittis in the form of my physical body. In your mind are vrittis in the form of the sound of my voice. In your mind are vrittis conveying to you whatever you touch. And in your mind arise vrittis of anything you smell or taste. So the vritti then metaphorically takes the form of the object. The word vishaya here means object. Vishaya anjana means vrittis which have assumed the forms of the objects that you perceive. This is tata, in the same way. So in the same way what? We can connect it to the prior verse. Those, just as whatever your eyes pick up produce vrittis in your mind, which are observed by you, the sakshi, the conscious observer. The same is true for your other four senses. They also produce vrittis in your mind, which are observed by you, the sakshi, not only from the five senses, which are external, right? Our senses are pointed out into the world. By the way, when I say out into the world, does that include your body or not? With regard to you, in an essential way, your body is outside. Every bit as much as this room is outside, your body is outside with regard to you. Because we have lots of perceptions inside the body. In fact, you've been told so many times that you have five senses. That's not correct. I think we have 7 or 8. I think, for example, inside you have this, you know the position of your limbs without seeing them, right? So how do you know the position of your limbs? That's a sense, in addition to the 5. How do you know if you're upside down? There's another sense. And there may be more than that. Anyway, the point I'm making, all of these senses are external. Even those in your body are external. But now what about things that are not external to the mind? What about things that are internal to the mind, like smriti, memories, raga, etc. Raga, desire, all other mental activities, your thoughts, your emotions, basically everything other than perception, which would mostly include thoughts and emotions. And here he gives the example of smriti, memory. Ragadi rupacha, these vrittis which have assumed the rupa, the form of raga, desire, etc., the form of all these other mental activities other than perception, all these also. All these are kevala antar manasi api. Api, they are also kevala, merely antar manasi, they are also merely in your mind. Oh, that... The joke is, where else could they be, right? And that reminds my guru, Puja Swami Dayananda, had this amazing insight about how we use language casually. And people would ask him, Swamiji, isn't this Vedanta all intellectual knowledge? And his response is, what other kind of knowledge is there? Is there such a thing as nasal knowledge? You said that several times. Very, very good point. So all of this obviously arises in your mind. All of it is witnessed by you as sakshi. Notice I didn't say witnessed by you, consciousness. Why? Consciousness in and of itself is not a witness. Again, sakshi is consciousness. Consciousness is not sakshi. Okay. Then, having discussed everything that you observe as a witness, which is external through your power of perception, and internal, which you directly observe as sakshi. All of this takes place in the waking state. What about the dream state? And that comes next. Manasyastadvaranyasya Manasyastadvaranyasya drishyante swapnavrittayah drishyante swapnavrittayah drashtur-drishtistato nitya drashtur-drishtistato nitya shuddhananta cha kevala shuddhananta cha kevala. Now talking about the dream state. In the middle of the first line, tadvat, in the same way. Drop down the line, swapna vrittayaha. The vrittis that occur in swapna, in dream, those vrittis also drishyante, are seen, are witnessed. In a dream, whatever takes place in your dream world is also witnessed by whom? And he says, by anyasya, by something else. Something else meaning anyas, something other than what? Manasyaha. The grammar, actually, it took me a few minutes to understand this grammar. That's feminine ablative, singular. It is other than the mind. Manasi is the word here for that which is of the mind. So this expression means for one who is other than the mind, which is Shankara's fairly obscure word or way of referring to sakshi. The one that's other than the mind, the one that's other than what is witnessed, is the witness. That's what he's saying. So, he says in the same way, whatever happens, I'll just paraphrase, whatever happens in your mind is witnessed by you in the waking state. Whatever happens to you whatever happens in your mind is witnessed by you in the dream state. Now, Shankara excludes, let me put it differently. Shankara doesn't mention deep sleep next. In fact, he's going to go to his conclusion in the second half of this verse, but without talking about deep sleep. And you think, what's wrong with that? If he's talking about you are the witness to whatever happens in you, you are the witness of all mental activities in the waking state. You are the witness of all mental activities in the dream state. Shankara deliberately does not say you are the witness of the absence of activities in deep sleep. He deliberately doesn't say that. Why? Some of you can answer. It's subtle. Why? Because, as we said before, you are only a sakshi with regard to something that is sakshya, witnessed. In the absence of anything witnessed, you can't be the sakshi. In the absence of a sibling, you can't be a sister or brother. So Shankara deliberately skips deep sleep because you are not even though we use this language, and this is a little bit like you and and your, it's a language problem, because a common expression used by scholars of Advaita Vedanta is avastha-traya sakshi to describe consciousness. The sakshi, the awareful observer of avastha-traya, of the three states of experience, waking, waking, dream, and deep sleep. This expression is used by all Vedantins. But do you see a little hitch, a little problem with that expression? Just like your consciousness or the consciousness of Atma, the problem is in deep sleep, it is technically incorrect to say you are, and I do mean technically here, it is technically incorrect to say that you are the witness of nothing. I mean, yeah, realistically speaking, in deep sleep, do you have that sense? Oh, I'm looking at nothing. You don't have that sense at all in deep sleep. Your mind is completely resolved. In fact, that's another good thing. Sakshi Sakshi, we said, is relational. In order to be Sakshi, in order to be the observer, there not only has to be an observer-observed relationship, but that observed is in your mind. If there's no mind, there's nothing to be observed. So sakshi is a term that only applies when your mind is present. In deep sleep, your mind is in a state of dissolution, resolution. So therefore, and this is very technical, and we're trying to understand that word sakshi very vividly. So we cannot technically say that you are the sakshi in deep sleep. On the other hand, it's absolutely true that you remain conscious in deep sleep. You are conscious in deep sleep. You are not sakshi in deep sleep. You're conscious in deep sleep because, as we've said in other classes, that consciousness is alupta. It never blinks off. Like an eye can blink, consciousness never blinks. So consciousness is present in deep sleep, but for this technical reason, you are not a sakshi in deep sleep. Now finally, Shankara now concludes his topic. He says in the middle of the third line, tataha, therefore, drashtuhu drishtihi. I'm smiling because we're back to the you and your thing here again. Drishtihi. In this literally means seeing, but in this context it means consciousness. Drashtuhu drishtihi. Literally the seeing of the seer. The seeing of the seer, but now let's put it in context. The consciousness of the sakshi. That's what it means. The seeing of the seer, literally, but the consciousness of the sakshi in the contextual meaning. The consciousness of the sakshi is nitya. It is eternal. By the way, anything that is eternal is also unchanging. There's nothing eternal that undergoes change, because as soon as anything undergoes change, it ceases to be what it used to be. So therefore it's not nitya. So nitya, eternal, is necessarily unchanging. And because your consciousness is unchanging, therefore your consciousness is shuddha in the final line. Shuddha, pure, in this context, unaffected. unaffected by whatever happens in your mind. The sun is not affected by what it shines upon. The sakshi is not affected by what it observes in your mind. Therefore, shuddha, literally pure, but untainted, unaffected. Also, your consciousness is ananta, limitless, boundaryless. We've said before, there are no spatial dimensions associated with consciousness, no height, no width, no weight. That's a good thing. So, actually, maybe it's not a good thing. You could blame atma. Oh, doctor says you're overweight. And it says, don't blame me, it's atma. I'm being absolutely silly. Okay. Ananta, having no dimensions, and because Atma has no dimensions, has no boundaries, has no limits, for that reason, Atma is Kevala, one and only. There is one consciousness, there is only one consciousness that reveals that reveals identically the mental activities in your mind and the activities in my mind are identically revealed. And remember, we've had this discussion before. Why don't I know your thoughts, etc.? We've observed very many times that that question is born not of consciousness. That question comes from your mind. Your mind is different from my mind. Consciousness is not different. And consciousness doesn't have that question. Your mind has that question. Okay. Anything else here? I think that's good. So now we understand the difference between chit and sakshi. Now we move on to the next topic. Anitya savishuddheti, anitya savishuddheti, grihyate travivekataha, grihyate travivekataha, sukhi dukkhi tata chaham, sukhi dukkhi tata chaham, drishyayo paribhutaya, drishyayo paribhutaya. Now, suppose one doesn't understand what's just been taught. Suppose there is the end of the second line, aviveka. Avivekataha, because of aviveka. Viveka means discernment. Discernment is really a nice word. So in most Vedanta books like to translate that as discrimination, which perhaps is a literally correct word, but somehow discrimination is associated with so many other things, I find it less helpful than the word discernment. Discernment means to understand what is what, and in this context, it's to discern the difference between sakshi and sakshya, the difference between observer and observed. And what Shankara observes here and in the next verse is that many people don't have that discernment. And why? Because they haven't studied this text and other Vedanta texts. So therefore, such people, first line, anitya sa avishuddha iti grihyate. Iti grihyate. Other people grasp, they think, they believe atra, here with regard to this relationship between observer and observed. In fact, atra, with relationship to the last topic, which was drashtuhu drishtihi, the consciousness of sakshi. So atra, with regard to the consciousness of sakshi, grihyate, many people believe that consciousness is anitya. Now, literally non-eternal, but in this context, more important to say subject to change. Consciousness is subject to change, including blinking on and off when you're awake or in deep sleep. So that's a kind of change. So many people believe that consciousness is anitya. It's not eternal. It's subject to change. Sa, so sa, it's in the feminine gender. Sa drishtihi. Drishti here is the word Shankara is using for consciousness. So that consciousness is also avishuddha. It is impure. It is tainted. It is affected by whatever happens in the mind. And this brings us back to one of our familiar metaphors, and that is this crystal, the clear crystal, represents unchanging consciousness. This clear crystal underwent no change, even though it appears orange. Orange is a mere appearance. The crystal remains utterly unaffected by the orangeness that appears. And this is what Shankara is referring to. If you don't appreciate it, so suppose there's a 2-year-old sitting here, and if I say this crystal remains clear, the 2-year-olds can speak well, right? Mostly? They can, I don't know. They can manage. The 2-year-old will say, Swami. And you'll say, it's orange. It's not clear. It's orange. I don't know, 2-year-olds probably can't do it. 3, 4, anyway. Not 2. As you can see, I haven't raised children. So anyway, the child would say, it's not clear, it's orange, can't you see? So the child will have a hard time with discernment, to understand that the appearance of orangeness doesn't truly affect the clear crystal. But we're not talking about 4-year-olds now, we're talking about 44-year-olds and 54-year-olds and 64-year-olds who, when their minds are happy, what do they say? This is the third line. When happiness is present in the mind, they'll say, Sukhi aham, I am happy. When sadness is in the mind, they'll say, Dukhi aham. And what's significant about that is it's not like saying the crystal is orange. I mean, that's already a mistake. This is a far greater mistake. The crystal is orange is one level. Suppose I say, I am orange. Huh? What kind of reasoning is that? You perceive orangeness. Whether the orangeness belongs to the cloth or crystal is something you can inquire into. But look at this. You perceive orangeness and say, I am orange. How ridiculous is that? But when you perceive happiness in your mind and you say, I am happy, isn't it the same thing? When you perceive sadness in your mind and you say, I am sad, you're taking these attributes that you perceive and identifying yourself with them. I don't know what to say. When you really get it, it is so ridiculously absurd to identify yourself with what you observe. Observer, observed. What a gap between observer and observed. How can you possibly say that attributes of the observed belong to the observer? Observer observes happiness. I am happy. so use the word sakshi. Sakshi is a witness of happiness in your mind, then you conclude, I am happy. Sakshi is a witness of sadness in your mind, and you conclude, I am sad. This is, I can't call it insanity, but it's ridiculous. It is aviveka, to use Shankara's words. Why does this happen? Drishyaya upadi bhutaya. It is due to what is observed. Drishya. Drishya here, same as sakshya. Drishya, what is seen. Sakshya, what is witnessed. Same meaning here. Drishyaya upadi bhutaya. So what is observed becomes an upadhi. And here we're using, Shankara uses this important technical term in at least one or two classes before. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about this extremely important technical term, which is often translated as conditioning adjunct, which doesn't seem to make it much more clear. The more finessed way of understanding upadhi is an adjunct, which means something other than the thing, something else which causes something to be misunderstood. Something else, conditioning adjunct, which causes something else to be misunderstood. This cloth, not orange. Orange is not the upadhi. Let's make sure we understand our terminology right. Cloth is the upadhi. It's the presence of cloth that makes this crystal appear as other than what it is. How does that take place? Well, there's a quality of the cloth, orangeness, which gets superimposed, falsely attributed to the clear crystal. So therefore, just as this cloth is an upadhi for the crystal, meaning that attributes of the cloth get superimposed on the clear crystal, in the same way, happiness and sadness are upadhis for you. That is, so happiness and sadness, first of all, are vrittis. These vrittis have attributes. The attribute of the happy vritti is happiness. The attribute of the sad vritti is sadness. And those attributes of happiness and sadness get superimposed on you, the unchanging consciousness. This crystal never changes. It appears orange, but it's an apparent orangeness. In the same way, consciousness never becomes happy or sad. You feel happy or sad. You experience happiness and sadness. But the point is, you can't take it real as being real. Do you experience orangeness? Absolutely. But as we've said here many times, experiences can be misleading. So you have to correctly interpret the experience. Do you experience happiness and sadness? Every day. But those experiences have to be correctly interpreted. And correctly interpreted means having viveka, having discernment. Okay, next. That didn't advance. There we go. Mudhaya mudhayatyevam, mudhaya mudhayatyevam, shuddhaya shuddhayatyapi, shuddhaya shuddhayatyapi, manyate sarvalokoyam, manyate sarvalokoyam, yena samsaram ricchati, yena samsaram ricchati. Start in the third line. Sarva lokaha, ayam, this, Sarva lokaha, all people. Loka can mean a little bit of Sanskrit. Most of you are accompanied to loka. You think Swarga loka, you think Indra loka, Vaishnava loka, these different lokas. Loka, in a very literal sense, is what is experienced, is a kind of a root meaning. And for that reason, it ends up also meaning the ones who have experience, which means people. And that sounds a little bit abstract, but many of you know Hindi. When you say sab log, what sarva loka, sab log. That's exactly that's where that expression comes from. So don't get stuck on loka only meaning a realm. Loka can absolutely mean people, as in sablog. So sarva lokaha ayam, all people, manyate, they think. What do they think? Go up to the first line. Mudhaya mudha iti. Mudha iti. I am confused. Why? Mudhaya. Because I experience confusion. Because of the confusion I experience in my mind, because of the look, if I change the language, it becomes pretty obvious. Because of the vrittis, which are in a form of confusion, which exist in my mind and which are observed by me, the sakshi, you get the point. And in spite of that discernment, this person says, I observe confusion, therefore I am confused. Or, alternatively, in the second line, shuddhaya, shuddhaha, itiyapi. Itiyapi also people would consider shuddhaha, I am pure. Shuddhaya, due to the presence of purity. So when the mind, purity is not maybe a very relatable word here. How about quietness? When the mind is quiet, then you feel, I am peaceful, right? Do you say, my mind is quiet? You say, I am peaceful. This is the absence of discernment. Look how deep it goes. Atma is not peaceful or unpeaceful. Consciousness is that which reveals the condition of your mind. Consciousness is sakshi, the observer, the awareful witness of the condition of your mind. But sarva lokaha manyate, most people don't have that discernment. And that discernment has a very unfortunate consequence. Sometimes lack of discernment doesn't always have a terrible consequence. If you really think the crystal is orange, okay, no harm, right? But when your mind is sad, when there is sadness is present in your mind, and you lack this discernment, and then you say, I am sad. That's a huge consequence. You have taken the problem of your mind and assumed it as your problem. And to use my guru's language, you have managed to turn a situation into a problem. You like that expression? Or a fact. The presence of sadness in your mind is a fact. It's only a problem when you make it a problem, when you lack the discernment, and when you conclude, I am sad. So this is one of the hallmarks of Vedantic teachings. And it sounds a little bit striking to put it in these words, but it's this. You create your own suffering due to lack of discernment. You. So it's not your mother-in-law that's making you suffer. It's not your boss. It's not your spouse. It's not whatever you want to blame your suffering on. All those things are facts. Your mother-in-law is who she is. Fact. Your boss is who she is. Fact. Everything is what it is. Fact. But it's you who convert all those factual situations into problems that make you suffer. So it's absolutely a fact that you create your own suffering, and that's actually a really good thing. Why is that such a good thing? Well, if your mother-in-law is really the cause of your suffering, you're stuck with her. And you'll continue to suffer. But if you are the cause of your suffering, and you can bring that suffering to an end with the kind of discernment that we've just discussed, that's a really good thing. It's up to you. So if you are the cause of your suffering, that's good, because if you are the cause, you can also be the cause of its absence. You can cease to turn situations into problems. You can come to accept facts as they are, knowing that your true nature as consciousness remains utterly unaffected. Okay, that's a good place to conclude today. Om Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Very nice.